platform right now. Did you use the link that was sent via Eventbrite? Yep, the one that you got in your email?
The email one is what I used.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. Okay, thank you. We are live on YouTube, so welcome everyone. And we're going to let people in as they come in, but we're a nice group, which is nice. I'm looking forward to this discussion. There is, and for those who are participating on ONYX Pages through a YouTube platform, welcome. And to those watching the replay, welcome. This is the live show for the Octavia E. Butler slow read for Bloodchild. So Tommy, if you can just share the screen. For those of you who are joining us in the, thank you, Tommy, in the Zoom platform, there is a poll that you are invited to complete. All right, so it is Sunday, September 25th, 2022, 1 p.m. Eastern. I am in Jerry. Tati is here too, and this is the live show. It's our third last live show for the Octavia Butler slow read, and we are here to discuss our first collection of short stories in the slow read, and that is Bloodchild and Other Stories by Octavia E. Butler. So if we can go to the next slide.
So as we do every month, every time we meet, we have our dedication, and it begins with "You wrote for freedom, yours and ours." We honor this when we read slowly, luxuriously, and collectively, exactly as you had imagined. We are your legacy. All right, and so we've started with our welcome and our dedication. Going forward, we will have our group agreement, which Jerry will read for us, and then we'll have our book chat. And Jerry and I will share our reflections, and then we may not do breakout rooms today, like we did. Okay, so we're not going to do breakout rooms, so we'll all stay together, and we will have our discussion as a group. I thought the mouse moving was a bug on my laptop. Y'all, I almost killed my laptop. We will have our discussions as a group for our thoughts on the stories that we read in Bloodchild. And then we will we'll go into our sound circle and group selfies. So if you are unfamiliar with what our sound circle is, we will each read a selection. We can read multiple ones if we choose, but you kind of want to have one of those already earmarked so that we can move easily through that process. And then we will have our group selfies where we will take a picture as a group with our books, and we will end with announcements. And we would love, I know this has Jerry's name on it, but I'm taking this. We would love, love, love to extend our heartfelt thank you and appreciation to Tommy, who is our techie person for today. And she was also our techie person last month. Thank you so much, Tommy, for your help. I greatly appreciate it. I know when Jerry appreciates it, you get her appreciation. I greatly appreciate this. Thank you very much.
All right. So all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you, as spoken by Lauren Oya Olamina in Parable of the Sower, written by our beloved OEB. We are co-creating this space today. I'm going to go over the group agreements that you've all seen. We are centering Black, Indigenous, people of color voices today in this space. Please speak mindfully. Think about how much time you're taking up. Encourage others to communicate. Give credit to the people whose ideas you're sharing if you choose to share. So keep that in mind. Hatred will not be tolerated. Propagators of racism, transphobia, and other forms of hatred will be removed from the space and not welcome back to further slow read live shows. And please share responsibly. We do encourage you to talk about the experience of the Octavia E. Butler slow read on your platforms. But please, if you are going to be using a photograph or you want to quote tweet anything that's been said, just private message the person if it's not yourself who you want to quote tweet, and get their permission before you do so.
All right, and as I already blurbed, so we'll make this really quick. At the end, we will do our book selfies. So make sure that you have your book ready, however, whichever format you chose to ingest this material. And then make sure that you flagged a section for the sound circle. This is a discussion of the stories that are in Bloodchild and other stories, as well as the essays. So there will be spoilers. We will not hold off on the nitty gritty in discussing the details of this. So if you have not finished, you're still welcome to participate, but please know we will be telling you some of the story as well. And if you notice something, say something. If someone says or does something either in the chat or that you see on cam that is offensive to you, you may send a private message in the chat to either Jerry, myself, or Tommy, and we will take care of it.
We are currently reading Bloodchild, a perfect introduction for new readers and a must-have for avid fans. This New York Times notable book includes Bloodchild, the short story, winner of both the Hugo and the Nebula Awards, and Speech Sound, which I think is, Tati, I think that's your favorite short story, winner of the Hugo Award. Appearing in print for the first time, Amnesty is a story of a woman named Noah who works to negotiate tense and codependent relationship between humans and the species of invaders. Also new to this collection is the Book of Martha, which asks, what would you do if God granted you the ability and responsibility to save humanity from itself? Like all of Octavia E. Butler's best writing, these works of the imagination are parables of the contemporary world. She proves constant in her vigil, an unblinking pessimist hoping to be proven wrong, and one of contemporary literature's strongest voices. We're going to start with our sharing of our thoughts about the book. So Tati, why don't you go ahead, and Tommy, you can release your screen.
All right. First thoughts. This, of course, like with everything else except the end of the Patternist series, this was a reread for me. And I have to say, in thinking of both times that I've read this, I'm not a big short story consumer, or I wasn't before reading Bloodchild. Reading some of the stories within this collection the first time made me more open to reading short stories from other authors. And as a result of that, I've actually come to enjoy short stories. Having said that, there are a couple in here that I was just like, wait, what? Huh? Particularly, and it was so funny when reading the afterwards, also something that I really enjoyed about this series. And I wish, because when Octavia Butler was alive, she did a good number of interviews. I wish that there would be like some transcript of those interviews that could be done, like release another edition. It's not like I haven't bought multiple copies of her books in other iterations. Release other editions that have some of those interview transcripts where she's talking about those books, because I really enjoyed getting the afterword, even if it's just sharing her experience with the story, particularly Crossover, which was the story that literally left me with an entire hump across my brain. But to have the afterword where she shares that that's actually the first story that she sold, which is so interesting, because for me that's the short story that has the least amount of information. And as someone who reads a lot of big books, I want the information, but also I enjoy the questions that are left after having completed these stories. Speech Sounds is my favorite of the collection, because it's really what happens, what do you do when our major method of communicating is taken away? and it's taken away not of something that you've done. It's a pandemic that hit, and it takes away humans' ability to communicate. And as people who can communicate, who can speak and can hear, we don't think about being in that type of situation. Like, we don't think about not being able to easily and openly communicate with everyone who is around us, at least the people who live in the same country, the same city, the same neighborhood that we live in. And then how do we handle that? What happens to your mind? What happens to your mental welfare, your physical welfare, when your major point of contact with other people goes away, and the response across the area, I can't even say across the globe, because there are still countries that are being impacted as we're reading the story. And everybody reverts to sounds and grunts and physical communication. And physical communication, if you look at children when they communicate and they can only communicate physically, it doesn't necessarily have the best outcomes. And so being in that type of situation as someone who can talk to a brick wall and make it respond, that's kind of a scary situation to even think about. And that, I think that's why that story resonated the most with me. But then you also have stories like the Book of Martha, where you have an opportunity to make these huge changes, and the thought process of that, and not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough to be in control of that much, or to have that much power as a human. So there are a lot of questions in this book that I think reading it this time, I did not ask the first time that I read it. The first time I read it, it was like, I have a goal to complete all of Octavia E. Butler's works, and this is one of those works, so I'm going to read this because then I'll be completed. Now, actually putting mind behind what I'm reading and thinking about what I'm reading, I have a lot of questions. And some of those questions are, my answers are scary, even to me. So I know if that's where I am, I'm not the only one who's there. And that's the beauty of reading short stories. And then the essays too. I'm gonna shut up in a second, I promise. I really like the essays because you get, for us who adore Octavia E. Butler's work, her passion is what you get in those essays. Her determination, like, one is telling how she went, what she went through and how she was supported by her mom, even though, if you know some of her history growing up, her mom was a domestic worker. And so the things that her mom would put money towards were not necessarily those things that were indulging into hobbies, what could be seen as a hobby. And so to have her mother indulge her in that desire, and then her taking that desire from being a teenager and rolling with it to having her own itinerary of what you need to do to stay motivated, to continue to feverishly write, because you want to be an author. You don't want a daytime gig with the author situation on the side. You want that to be your whole thing. And so I really adored having her passion, because when I read those, and I'm not an essay reader, still not, I don't think that's happening, but I feel like I'm talking to her, or she's talking to me, and I just get to listen. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm done. And Jerry, your turn.
I love hearing your thoughts. And I'm looking forward to hearing everybody else's thoughts. So I love Bloodchild. I love that we were given this gift of Octavia Butler's short works. I love that she wouldn't have had the pressure to create huge, expansive worlds, and that we get to see in this collection sort of a different side of her, in my view. We get to see her trying out different landscapes. Like with Crossover, for example, I think that's one of the more mundane stories that I've ever read, that she's written, where it's just like, 3 or 4 characters, and really it kind of gives us the feeling of what Dana in Kindred would have gone through in terms of her job search, and kind of feeling like unemployment was a big threat to her, like the moments before she was whooped back in time. But I just loved it. I hope that we'll be able to get into like the stories and talk about them story by story by story. But I will make a couple of comments. My favorite story out of this collection, and I haven't read Unexpected Stories, so this might not last once January comes around, but my favorite story is the Book of Martha. And the reason why the Book of Martha is my favorite story is because here we actually have a Black woman confronting the image of God. And I know that Octavia E. Butler was somebody who studied religions, and in all of her works, she has, to some extent, people encountering religion either in its presence or in its absence, whether it's like a tool for organizing society or whether it is used as a tool of repression. And I think in the Book of Martha, the thing that was most interesting to me, and it stuck with me the first time I read the story, it stuck with me now, it stuck with me again this time, is the way that the face of God literally changes, and how Octavia E. Butler comments and criticizes, in my view, the white male heterosexual father God image in such a beautiful and subtle maybe way. And I loved that so much, because in her other writing, we confront religion or spiritual groups or communities that are connected with like a secular belief system. We encounter them, and we get in Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, Lauren Olamina resisting her pastor father's view of religion in the world, but we don't actually get a one-on-one confrontation with this image of God. And when I first read this book, I was within a few years of leaving Christianity. And so for me, that's what stuck out for me from about Martha's journey. And I just thought it was so amazing. I would love to see the Book of Martha as a short film. I think it would be amazing. And I felt like, I think it's Amnesty. It was very difficult for me to read Amnesty and not think of Lilith in Dawn. And for me, again, we have Noah. We have a Black woman who is tasked with helping, coercing, shepherding, whatever it is, a group of humans who have to connect with, in this case, be employed by this alien group, these stranger communities. And it's her job as a Black woman, as the descendant of enslaved Africans, to explain to a diverse small group of people how they could potentially survive. And it reminded me of Lilith's first encounter with the first generation of people who were taken out of the pods when they were all in that. Remember when they were all in that like football field, and she had to go through the files and figure out who to choose and who were going to engage with the Oankali. And so in comparing Amnesty to Dawn, I asked myself, what's the difference between those two stories, and why did we get a more expansive version of Lilith and the Oankali and only a small short story based version of Noah and the stranger communities? And I'm really curious as to what others thought about those two different strands of stories, like how they were different and how they're similar. And we don't really get I think for Octavia Butler, she says in the beginning of Bloodchild that she doesn't really see herself as a short story writer. She's always seen herself as a novelist, and I beg to differ. I think that her short stories are excellent, and that they gave us just enough to get into the themes and then to explore more. So this was an absolute delight to read and to reread. And I'm looking forward to us talking. I hope that we can talk story by story about each of the short works and really get into the material. But it was an absolute delight. And other than Fledgling, this was the book that I was looking forward to most out of the entire slow read. So I'm in my place of joy, my place of joy right now, for sure. So if we can, I'm not following the chat right now. Is there anything that folks are saying in YouTube, Tati, that we should be looking?
Just that Alicia, Pretty Brown Eyed Reader, shared that the afterwards gave context for the stories and felt like tapping into the mind of Octavia Butler.
Yeah. And I think that that's so valuable now that she's passed into the realm of the ancestors, right? Because now we have, other than her diaries and the Huntington collection of like her estate, this is what we have. All right. I think this is a good time to move into the group discussion. So we're going to stay in the large room all together. And Tati, how do you feel about just like organizing our discussion of the collection story by story? Does that work for you?
I'm unmuted. Okay, I was going to unmute myself. I'm totally fine with that.
Okay. All right. Well, how about I start? I'll start. So feel free to unmute yourselves. And if you are one of the folks who are watching in the chat, welcome. Feel free to share your comments on Bloodchild. So in Bloodchild, our main character is interacting with, again, these alien T-Gatoi. This is the one with the egg, and Octavia E. Butler calls this her pregnant man story. She wanted to explore that. So what did you think of Bloodchild? Anyone and everyone.
Bloodchild was very creepy. It was very skin crawly. I have a phobia of aliens, and I just love Octavia E. Butler so much that I'm like, you know what? I can process this phobia in therapy for her. It's okay. I can process this, so I'll be able to read all of her works. It was just creepy, but it was so well written, and I could picture everything. I could picture everything in my head happening, and that was like that added to the creep factor. It was just really well written and creative, and the way that she tends to write aliens often, and it's different. The species are different every time. It's so like they're so different from each other, and I love that so much that we could go from reading Bloodchild to reading Amnesty, and they're not even the same types of aliens. But it was creepy. I have a phobia, but I enjoyed it. Like, it's one of those, like, I'm scared, but I like it. So I really appreciated the story, and I see why it won the awards, because she deserved it.
Yeah, and as different, am I unmuted? Can y'all hear me? Okay. As different as they are, I do agree with you on that, MJ. They all though still have to go in you. Like, there is still y'all didn't see MJ's face right now. But they all still have to go in you in some way, shape, or form, or there is a union. There has not been an alien story without some type of union. In this, not only do they inject a fur, because when it starts off, it's like, a sterile egg. And I was like, why does it matter that the egg is sterile? Oh, because this one that they're in, that it's inserting in you, which in itself is a whole thing, is not, and it's going to grow this cannibal spawn in you that, if not taken out fast enough, it can eat you from the inside out. Also, I think that's where the chick who wrote Twilight got the idea for the whole birthing situation when Bella has her baby. That immediately popped in my head, and I was like, oh, okay, she knows Octavia in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, that they are all very different, but that I gotta get in you to work through you is ugh. Anyone else thoughts on Bloodchild?
Just on the topic of aliens, right? So I find that one of the themes that OEB explores in any of her stories that involve aliens is the question, like, what options will there be? Because for her, it's an inevitability that humanity will be engaging with other beings, right? It is inevitable because our destiny is to be among the stars, and we're not the only ones. And so for her, sure, it's science fiction, but at some point there's going to be an encounter, maybe not in our lifetimes. And so I feel like she explores these themes of coercion, domination, colonization of humanity. And she does it differently. I agree, MJ, like, not only are the species different, but I feel like she plays with different kinds of relationships and different degrees of agency and autonomy, right? So in some circumstances, there's no ability to say no, right? In other circumstances, she creates relationships where there are certain degrees of coercion or choices that can be made. So I'm just wondering about, in Bloodchild, you have the egg operating as a drug that reduces the ability to feel a sense of will. It makes the person who has ingested the fluid more compliant. We know in our time, and even in previous times, that we have had to deal with, in particular, women and femmes, right, being susceptible to drugs designed to make them more compliant, to make us more compliant in contexts of sexual violence and other kinds of contexts. So, here she's using that, and she uses things like pheromones and substances and toxins that kind of scratch away at our ability to follow our own impulses and our own desires. So what does she do differently in Bloodchild as compared to some of the other alien stories that we've encountered so far?
I have some comments from the YouTube chat. CA says, I wonder if this was required reading in schools, would we be dealing with the anti-abortion wave now? I know it's hyperbole, but still. And then they also said, I loved how she played with gender norms and emotions that are usually or supposed to be singularly woman. With the emotions that the men were feeling with the male character, the male lead. I don't even remember his name. Y'all, I made notes and I still didn't write down the baby's name. Okay. And Alicia shared that she was initially disgusted by the story, but then it made her think about parasitic relationships. Good God from Zion, Alicia. Okay. And she said she also thought about abortion with several of these stories, and several of the stories in this collection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think we've talked about Octavia E. Butler and gender identity and like the limited exploration in her work. of the experiences of non-binary and trans folks in her writing. And so when she says, you know, this was my pregnant man story, I think it's fair to say that she wasn't making that making that statement from the perspective of someone who had written through and thought of the experiences of people whose sex designation as adults is different from their sex designation at birth. And now society, despite the continuation of transphobia, now our society is more open to even the conversation. It's actually like in our contemplation. So a pregnant man in 2022, the concept of a pregnant man encountering aliens is very different from the concept of a pregnant man in 2005, or even, I think she first wrote this in 95 or 96. The conversations have, and the work, and the resistance work done by LGBT communities have advanced the conversation in the past decade. So now the question that I think we're asking now is a little bit different than, or perhaps vastly different than what she might have been asking at the time. And still, I wonder if like readers are more offended by cis male being forced to birth and they would be by a cis female and or femme being forced to birth. And where does that conversation take us?
So here is my question after reading Bloodchild. Because they select the man who will be, or the male who will be the carrier of these fertile eggs and these cannibal centipedes that I imagine to be probably about as big as my hand when they take them out, just for the gross factor. Just wanted to put that out there. But they also have a time, or there are those that they leave alone, like they leave the females alone who are of childbearing age, and they leave some men alone to be able to continue to produce human offspring. So here is like my question is, when you get pregnant, like there was this whole reel I just saw a couple earlier this week about how women, when there is sex that happens, they hold on to the DNA in male sperm for years after sexual encounters take place. So my question is, you've been you like being pregnant for a female alters your DNA because you are hosting another human, and in that alteration, if it happens on the side of the male who holds the sperm, when that DNA is altered while they are holding these aliens to give birth to them, MJ, am I making you itch? How far does that DNA go? If the male then has sex with the female and the female becomes pregnant or not, is there alien DNA that's within that sperm if female becomes pregnant? Like, that's where my brain goes with the question after reading this story. How far does that alien DNA go once it is inside into everything else? Like, anybody with a scientific background, the person who has a scientific background.
Can you give us a course on that class you just gave us?
Absolutely. Why would you want that, Jennifer?
Because you just confused the hell out of me. And that's not the word I really wanted to use, but I'm just being nice for right now.
I think like OEB, I mean, she toyed with the idea of, and I think she did this in the Xenogenesis, like further on, she toys with different amounts, like different combinations of human to alien DNA when she shows us like the different constructs, right? Like, so if it was an Oankali and an Uloi and a female, right? And of course, like she's, for me, but this like binary, this sex binary is so necessary to her writing that it's hard to kind of break out of it in even talking about it, right? But I think that there are lots of questions about like how long would this alien DNA last and what kind of impacts might it have beyond the physical, right? So it could two humans who copulate and give birth biologically without having any first gen contact with alien DNA produce a human with other qualities that might be alien, and how would that be identified, right? There are all sorts of questions there to certainly explore. But Jennifer, the question you didn't ask, or maybe what I took as subtext, there's a rabbit hole we have just gone down. So pulling out of that, before we move on to the next story, the evening and the morning and the night, are there any more comments about Icky Poo Bloodchild? Okay. All right. So the next story in the collection is the evening and the morning and the night. And this is the one that concerns the Duria Gold disease. And we learn about the disease through the interaction of these two characters, one of whom has a mother who has the disease, who's in an institution. They go to visit her in this institution. They learn more about advances in attempts to manage this disease and what the future could potentially hold, but they also learn how those with the disease have been able to create scientific and medical advances. And the main character has a choice to make about how she is going to proceed, right? And what options are available to her, if they actually are options. And in the afterword, Butler tells us about how she created this disease by thinking about like 3 real world diseases and how they impact us. And we also see her interest in pheromones come up in this story yet again. And yeah, so what are your thoughts about the evening and the morning and the night? Did you like the story? Not like the story? What came up for you?
This one was my favorite story in the collection, and I really liked it because it was creepy and it's getting close to Halloween, and it had disability representation, disabled representation, and there were questions about deteriorating when you have a disability, and what your family can do for you, or if your family can do anything for you. There were questions and conversations about abortion, and even I discussed the evening, the morning, and the night with another group of people, and we talked about eugenics being a thing. That came up in that story. And so and I really like the idea of the MC, the main character, being this like queen bee, and like kind of not getting along with I can't remember, but the older woman's name. The older woman, Beatrice. She didn't really get along with Beatrice because they're both like queen bees, and so they're like, she was like, girl, I don't like you as much as you don't like me. It's fine. They don't like each other. I just really liked the story. It was so creative. And then the afterword was just the best part about Bloodchild, I think, are the afterwards, because it brings us closer to OEB and what she was thinking at the time. And she even says at the beginning of the book, well, people always say Butler thinks, and Butler must think, and Butler might be thinking. And so she said this was her opportunity to say, you know what, no, I speak for myself. And so I like the afterword when she says that she took from different real world disabilities and diseases and made her, I don't know how to pronounce it, her disease in the book.
DG,
yeah. it was just really interesting. The whole thing was just really interesting, really well thought out. But that's I could say that about all of her works. I just liked the disability representation. I liked that in the end that there was something that could be done to help the disabled people. And that there was something that could be done to soothe their pain. And I liked that there was a solution for that.
Thank you for sharing that, NJ, because I didn't even think about it necessarily as disability representation. Um, because yeah, I didn't even think about that as an actual thing that was happening. So thank you even for sharing that. Yeah, I had a lot of questions that were left after this. But I one of the things that struck me about this story is that it also, as inventive and interesting as it also highlights some of the disadvantages or um, gray areas within the field of medicine, because this whole DGD disease came about because of a cancer treatment. And then it was discovered after, I don't know who patient zero was, who had this new cancer treatment and then had a child, to come to the understanding that there's no gray area. If you have this cancer treatment, you are going to produce a child, if you have kids, who has this disease. And the idea of there being no way to reverse the effects of it, and the one way that they find to stem the progression of it is that you have these queen bee individuals who happen to have two DGD parents, which is what society says don't do. Like, if you have this cancer treatment, you're going to have a child with DGD. This is what could possibly happen as a result of you having this child with DGD. So, of all things, please don't. And only if the mother has it, which I found also very interesting. Only if the mother has it, the cancer treatment, will the child get it, not the father, the mother. But if you have a male child born of a mother who had the cancer treatment, who meets a female child who either had the cancer treatment or is born of a mother who had the cancer treatment, you're going to get a double DGD child. Like, and so this double DGD child is the soothing balm for the DGD community. And when something of that nature is so spoken out against, the chance of you having that queen bee situation is so small, which is why there are so many people who are in the facility where Beatrice works. Because how many others are there? We still don't know. After the main Lynn is the main character. After the main character leaves and discovers what she has been doing and what she could do with her future, we still don't know if there are others like her where this same thing has been found. That you know that this is something that you could do, a way that you could offer yourself. And I found it also so interesting that inherently they don't mind. Lynn doesn't mind. She's doing it without realizing that she's doing it when she moves off campus at her university. She doesn't mind. It fits just like whatever hole needs to be filled in for the DGD patients who are living with her, to focus on or be reminded about things that they need to do so that they literally don't cannibalize themselves or somebody else. It's not a negative thing for her to do that. It feels right for her to be doing that. That's what occupies her. And so it's kind of like that, it's the chosen one trope. It's looking at these changes that need to happen in society, but in the same way also looking at how medical science has been stymied to a certain point when dealing with these, because you have two different kinds of facilities. You have the facility that is the one where her parents took her when she was a teenager, And rightfully so, considering they both knew they were DGD, like that needed to happen. But also her alternative to that was, I don't want to live to get to this point. So let me take care of this and end this now. So to have been kept from doing that by her father, and then all these years later find a purpose, how eye-opening and liberating can that be for her? How, like, eye-opening and liberating would that be for us? If something that we don't have control over, we found a way that included other people to help control that impulse. So that while we're being helped, we can help someone else, which in Jerry knows, for me, that would, like, without the deadly consequences, like that would be my own version of utopia, like taking something that you need within you and being able to help someone, and at the same time being helped with the void that you're dealing with. Like, that's the beauty of it. So that's what I was so much focused on when reading the story, not even the looking at and delving deep into it. Again, it's perspective. Not looking into and delving into the disability portion of it. And so now it's like I kind of want to reread this to look at it from that perspective. So thank you a lot for sharing that.
There's a book called Body Minds Reimagined by Dr. Sami Shah, where she looks at disability representation and the intersection between disability and feminist and Black speculative fiction and the writing of Black feminist, Black writers, Black speculative fiction writers. And so that would be a really good book if people are interested in looking at disability representation, which I think is important in speculative fiction in particular. And I had the opportunity to hear her speak about Octavia E. Butler's writing. And one of the things that Dr. Shah talks about is that the separation of the body and the mind in the discussion about disability, and then as a result, the separation of disability from discussions of race and general discussions of oppression is really problematic. And it's also very different from how women of color, in particular, Black women, actually experience disability. And so I think like that offers an interesting lens, because really a lot of Octavia Butler's work actually engages disability representation, and whether it's about mutation, genetic disorder. And I know we're going to talk about speech sounds because I have a similar comment about speech sounds, but I remember going to this presentation on ableism, and the presentation was led by a blind man. And one of the things that he said in that presentation that stuck with me was, he said, if the lights went out right now, I would be the only, and there is an emergency, I would be the only person who could find my way and manage myself without the ability of sight, right? And in that way, my ability to maneuver in the world is actually superior than that to everybody else in this room. And then he asked us to think about what it felt like for us to see our bodies, to like have a self-perception of our own bodies as, in his words, as disabled or temporarily disabled. And I think that there are certainly critiques about that approach, but just thinking about how societies are created for the benefit of people whose bodies work in a particular way is a fascinating lens to use, right? So asking the question, like, who would be able to survive? So just to skip to speech sounds, one of my questions about that is, well, people who have always used sign language to communicate, right, would have managed, right, in a way that I would not have. And the complete reversal of power and hierarchy around communication, that is something I think we should explore. Like, there's so much about ableism in this collection and generally that is, that's there for us to certainly explore. So other thoughts about the evening and the morning and the night? And they can be like super petty thoughts too, because I have petty thoughts
Yes, I actually was about to share a petty thought,
Yeah.
and then I was like, let somebody else speak.
Yeah, let's see if somebody other than the hosts have things to offer.
So I thought it was interesting, thought that you were saying that Noah, is it Noah? Am I getting the names mixed up?
Lynn,
The protagonist here is
Lynn,
Noah, right? No.
Lynn.
Lynn.
Lynn, thank you, Lynn. That Lynn didn't mind kind of like being queen bee or kind of giving this influence on other people. And I felt like in the beginning, she didn't mind when she didn't know what she was doing, when she thought she was just giving like a gentle reminder, like just being like helpful of like, oh yeah, I'm just like part of someone's, you know, support system for like executive function or something like that. Like, I don't mind if that's how I'm helping roomies. But then when she realizes what she's doing, I felt like it didn't sit with her as well then. I think it was like clear that there was no question for her, that she felt a responsibility and a duty to take on that role. But I did feel like it bothered her. I did feel like she didn't want that role. And I was thinking about like the last sentences where it like felt kind of particularly sad to me, where she says, for long irrational minutes, I was convinced that somehow if I turned, I would see myself standing there, gray and old, growing small in the distance, vanishing. And I felt like she was seeing like out of this duty and responsibility, like everything that I want, everything that like my own needs are going to have to disappear in service to this community. I was like, that's some weight that she had on her, but it seemed like there was just zero question that she was going to do it. It like didn't even need, you know, a moment to contemplate what she would do with that responsibility, but that still she felt that weight.
And I thank you, Maria. Also nice to see you. I think that it's like we see that a lot in her writing. Like I think about Lilith, and I think about like, you know, like the power, like what do you do when you have the ability to influence people? I'm thinking about Doro and all the different iterations of like powerful entities in not Seed to Harvest. Yeah, Seed to Harvest. Is that what Wild Seed was? Seed to Harvest? No, not Lilith's Brood. Anyway, the Wild Seed, those stories.
Yeah,
gosh.
Seed to Harvest is
Yeah.
yeah, or the Patternist series.
Yeah.
And then I feel like there was this moment where Lynn, like when Beatrice starts saying to her, like looks at her deeply and it's like, you know, do you find that people listen to you? And, you know, do you find, and when Lynn sort of realizes, wait a minute, are you saying that when I became the house mother, right? And reminded people of their chores, that I was like asserting my will upon them. Like she seemed uncomfortable with that idea, because her first, and it's not only what's said, but also what's not said, right? She did not like Beatrice, not only because she had this territorial response to how Beatrice was interacting with her man, but also it seemed that she was offended by Beatrice and didn't trust this, you know, woman being presented to her as this kind, matronly person who's still head of an institution. So when Beatrice says, this is not like those institutions that you saw before. We're not forcing people to do things. We're not tying them up. We're not any of the lacerations on their face would have happened before they got here, right? She doesn't trust Beatrice at the beginning, and throughout the whole time. And I think part of that was because she was also responding to this sense of this one woman appearing to have control in an institution over a whole bunch of people. And I think for what I got was Lynn saying, like, I'm not sure that I want any part of that. Maybe what I've done before, the stuff that I did naturally, maybe that feels comfortable. But when Beatrice said to her, you could have your, like, you would have your own institution, you would have your own space, it kind of felt like she was reluctant a little bit about that idea, but also curious about it.
She still does it without thinking too, because the interaction between her and Alan's mom, between Lynn and Alan's mom, like this is her this is their first time meeting. And all I could think about was being in Alan's situation, to find out that your mom's alive, and your mom's response to seeing you is to like get ready to pull and scrape. And Lynn just takes her hands and says no. And she does it she does it in that situation, in this environment, without even thinking about it. And two, Maria, to piggyback on what you said about her doing it without realizing it, my petty thought is, did her dad save her? Because he knew, even without knowing exactly what to call it, he knew that because she was there, it helped stabilize him and her mother. Like that was my petty thought. And that's where, if I were in her position and learning this as a young adult, that's where my head would go. Not only did my dad save me so that I would continue, I would be this person, this pheromone for him and my mom, without knowing what they were doing. And then, because I wasn't there, is that why he ate my mom and then himself? Like, that's a lot. Anybody else?
Just looking at the YouTube chat.
Thank you.
Regina Renee, well, nice to see you. You LOL'd at petty thoughts. We want to hear your petty thoughts. Please don't keep them to yourself. I know they will be archived in YouTube for all of time, but please don't let that stop you from sharing them. And then C.A. Nuaugo, you were saying that, I think you've been talking about epigenetics coming out of our discussion of Bloodchild. So you've recommended Ghost in Your Genes, and I think also had some comments about sickle cell anemia on the continent of Africa and how it operates throughout, like, transgenerationally. So for those wanting to go back into the replay, there's some interesting conversation there. In the afterword of the evening and the morning and the night, and also, does anybody know, or can anybody make a connection between the evening and the morning and the night and the story? Because I didn't understand how the title connected with the story. Does anybody have thoughts about that?
I have the same question. That's my
thought. I have one thought. What I've learned about dementia, which is very, very little, is that sometimes individuals who have dementia at a certain point of the day go into their own realities, and that's sort of called sundown. And so I was wondering if the reference to the evening and the morning and the night had to do with that subtle kind of pulling away from, that just pulling away from the reality that we all share and receding into your own. So I wondered if she was playing with that, like how that was one thought that I had. And then the other thing that I just wanted to point out here is, she says, and this is page 70 for those of you who have this book, she says in that last, so to elements of these disorders, I added my own particular twists, a sensitivity to pheromones and the sufferer's persistent delusion that they are trapped, imprisoned within their own flesh, and that flesh is somehow not truly part of them. In that last, I took an idea familiar to us all, present in many religions and philosophies, and carried it to a terrible extreme. Now, I think that Butler was being coy there by not naming what she was talking about. But for me, when I read that, I was thinking about the flesh as sinful, and needing to do things to atone for this original sin, and the flesh itself being sinful. And so needing to separate oneself from that sense of sinfulness throughout one's life, right? Now, I don't know if others thought that was her reference, but I was curious about how she played with that by making that very much literal. So Olivia, in terms of the title, Olivia says, I wonder if it's more a metaphor for different phases of states of mind or life, like the solution to the Sphinx's riddle. Cool.
I thought it could be in relation, like, to piggyback off what she said, maybe it could be in relation to, um, how mentally ill people or disabled people like myself just experience our disabilities. Like we have to take it the morning and the evening and the night. We have to take it one step at a time because because you're difficult. It's difficult moving at a different pace. So maybe it had to do with that. I don't know. Just some of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you as well. All right, are we complete? Do you think we want to move to the next story, Near of Kin? Okay. All right. Near of Kin. I think that it's fair to say that most of Octavia E. Butler's stories come with their own content and trigger warnings. But I'm just going to lean right into this one. She says here that this was her sympathetic story of incest. So for those who need to take space during this part of the conversation, please do so. But, you know, we know that Octavia E. Butler, one of the beauties of her work is that she didn't look away, right? She looked dead in the face of the things that are taboo, and she, you know, pulled them apart and gave them back to us with questions. And so here we are introduced to a character who is dealing with the passage of a parent, and in doing so, learning about her uncle, and learning about her family, learning about things that were, learning reluctantly about things that were, learning about her mom through things that were left behind, and also dealing with not even wanting to accept any inheritance because she felt as though she had not been supported by her family, separated by her family. So there are themes of recovery, there are themes of family secrets, there are themes of legacies, and also themes of intergenerational healing and trauma. And so certainly, you know, this particular story is a powerful one. And I think that, you know, just to be a little bit gentle with it, like I think a lot of, you know, through the slow read, which was born out of COVID-19, a lot of us have dealt with the passing of people that we love. So I just want to honor that in having these conversations. There might be some who are closer or further away, even in my family, of in terms of people close to us passing away. So it is a tender story for me personally, and our family, but also certainly others. So with that said, let's get into Near of Kin. Thoughts about that? So Alicia is starting us off in the chats in YouTube saying, I had to do a double take when the uncle was as father was revealed. And she asks the question, was this a sympathetic story of incest? Can you say more about that? How would you answer your own question, Alicia? I saw the I mean, what happens in this story is that a woman and her adopted brother have a love relationship that produces a child. And we are dealing with, because that relationship is not central in the story, what's central in the story is the relationship between a woman and her uncle / father. Their love had already been established. And even while that love relationship had been established, she had inklings, maybe suspicions, questions that never got really answered for her. And so it's unclear as to what came first, really. I think the love relationship between her and her uncle came before, may have come before the realization that he might have been her father, but that's not totally clear. I mean, maybe others had different views about that. But I think the sympathetic part of it, Alicia and others, might be that despite the taboos, there is a real trust relationship there. And that makes the story perhaps problematic to those who would say that the relationship that produced this child was sinful, problematic, whatever it is. But I'm going to stop because I want to hear from others on this one.
I want to hear from others too, but can we just pause and honor my brain snafu in missing the line that Stephen was adopted? Totally, like, it's one line, and I just found it, and I totally missed that line. And so, not that it changes like the story, because it is what it is, but also, I don't think I wonder what. Okay, that's not for exploration here. I question whether or not, because Stephen is operating under the idea that for all of these years, nobody knows. But she looked at a picture of herself and said, I look just like my uncle. And that's what made her realize. So if that's what she's realized as a kid, how do you think Stephen, that no one else knows? I think that's why his other sister don't fuck with him like that. Because they know and they don't like it. And I also think whether or not we have questions, because we don't know, because the mother is dead. I have questions about how this relationship came to be. Was it a love relationship? We have one person telling the story of their relationship. Was it a love situation, or was it a coercing situation, or was it a, I don't really know what's happening on the side of either of them, and we made a human. Like, I don't think that the family doesn't know. Mothers are not dumb. You're not telling me that this grandmother raised a kid who looks like her adopted son and doesn't know that that's his, like, that's his daughter. So that was like the big thing for me, and the entirety of this story, I think, on the side of the main character, is the need to know or feel wanted. And that may hit me a little bit different than it hits some other people, but the need to know and feel that someone wants her. Grandmother may have accepted her and taken her out of obligation because mom won't. Uncle can't because questions who baby this is. And it turns out not only do you look just like your uncle, but you look just like your mom, your aunt. Like, where does, like, I like that it's called near of and not next of, because it's like that, it's that blurring of the line. There's holla out anybody. And Jerry and I have done, I don't normally say this, and Jerry and I have done a lot of talking, as has MJ. Come on, people. We know, and Maria, I don't want to, Maria as well. Please, like, everybody on YouTube doesn't get to see how we have our conversations. Like, holla. Don't holla, because folks might have one headphone. But
okay, so
thank you.
This was an uncomfortable story, and I was liking it until the end, which was the uncomfortable part. The reason it made me uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, is because I have a niece who was just born like a year and a half ago, and I couldn't help but sort of see my relationship with her, what I hope it would be. Hopefully, a good relationship down the road. I don't see any reason why it's not anyway. It breaks, like, connection breaks down. I'm getting off tangents. My point is that like I was like, I sympathize with that desire to want to have a good relationship with your niece, and when it went in that different direction, it made me just very uncomfortable. Like, why can't you have a good relationship with your niece? I also missed the line about being adopted because I thought to myself, I mean, I look a little bit like my niece, but that's just because I look like my sister, and it's like. But anyway, so like I was connecting a little bit, and then like it didn't like where it went, and made me more and more uncomfortable, which I guess may be the point, was to make us uncomfortable. So
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, and I think Octavia Butler does, to speak to the uncomfortableness of it. I think Octavia Butler does a great job, or did, damn, past tense, a great job of making us uncomfortable, but still making us keeping us engaged, and what we want to know what's going to happen. We're uncomfortable, and y'all gonna see that in the next book. But we can't let this go without seeing what the end is. And yes, too, Josh, like, before, again, I just realized, as in Jerry was speaking, that the uncle's adopted. So in my mind, I'm thinking, I mean, I look like my siblings a little bit. So why would that be abnormal? But now that that has clicked, holy shit on a stick. Like, they know. They know.
Others, how about some new voices?
Oh, CA says in the YouTube chat, because the question about is it a sympathetic story? CA says Butler didn't write it with an air of judgment, and maybe that is what gives it its sympathetic edge. Alicia said that she thinks it would be sympathetic. CA, if you don't mind, please share your pronouns. I would greatly appreciate it. Alicia says she thinks it would be sympathetic because there wasn't violence in the sexual encounter between the mother and the uncle.
I think it's also sympathetic because the reader is encouraged, the reader is given access to the love between uncle and niece before the reader is given information about the true nature of the relationship. So, and Octavia E. Butler is masterful. So we're not dealing with a novice writer. She's masterful. And she knows how to pull at the heartstrings of her readers. She knows what words to use. She knows how to dole out information. She knows how to withhold information. So if she had told us in the first line, right, the man who I had known as uncle but is now father watched me open the box, right? If she had told us that first line, then we would have been like reading that whole story through Screwface, right? But that information doesn't get to us until after it's established that out of everyone, right, he's the one that she trusts perhaps even the most, with her mixed feelings about her mother's estate and her mother's passing, right? And I think that's what's sympathetic, right? Is that we don't even get an opportunity until after we're exposed to the love, right? We get love first, then we get context. And so by sealing off the possibility of the judgment until later on in the story, I think that was what was sympathetic, right? Like, it's not an impugned relationship right at the beginning. It's not, it's not that. And so I think for me, that's kind of what it was, because, and also I think it's sympathetic because see how many people missed it that he was adopted? Like, there's a few things she just sort of dropped and walked away from. And Octavia doesn't just drop things. Like, everything that she does is deliberate. We know that about her, right? And so, yeah. Anything else about, I I want to offer something here, like, because when I was reading it, I in all of these stories, I was saying, okay, so what is speculative about this? And for me, when I'm trying to figure out whether a story is speculative or not, I always ask the question, like, what is the what if question that's being asked here? And for me, the what if question was like, you know, what if a child, what if a child born out of what would be seen as an incestuous coupling had a loving relationship with, you know, with their parent, right? Like, what kind of family or what kind of communities would we need to have to not sort of punish the child for that, or for their origins in that particular way, or punish anybody in that particular way, right? And I know that gets to difficult areas as well, but assuming consensual relationships between two adults, which is what is implied in this story, because the uncle says, like, we loved each other perhaps too much, right? So, okay. Are we good to move to speech sounds? Okay. I'm looking at time, and I know that we have been talking longer than we usually do in the small groups, but I'm hoping that folks are still good for time. So in speech sounds, there was trouble aboard the Washington Boulevard bus, one of the most beautiful opening lines of any story I've ever read, full of ominous. We know that Octavia E. Butler was a walker, was a user of public transport. She tells us that in the afterword, but she also tells us that in almost every interview that she ever did, because she lived most of her life in poverty, or near poverty. And so we see apocalypse perhaps through the eyes of a Black woman on a bus. So speech sounds, who wants to start us off with your thoughts about that story? Maybe some new voices. I know, Tati, you're holding yourself back because it's your favorite story of all time. I'm holding myself back too. Some new voices. We've got Juanita and Sharon and Jennifer. Who else do we have? I don't see everybody on the Mitra, and hi, Bridget, and Cynthia and Okui.
So I'll start. This was my favorite story of them as well, and I thought, the fight on the bus didn't really get my attention too much, because you see those, maybe not quite as violent, but the role of the pandemic certainly caught my attention, and the loss of people's senses, and particularly speech and other ways of communicating, and the way people were learning to live with, I don't even want to call them disabilities, but just a new way of life, and trying to communicate and get through the day. And coming out of a 3-year she sets it as it's already been 3 years, and she's always ahead of us. So I just thought it is interesting in how they're building a new world. It's certainly a very violent and ugly world that they're building, but then there's goodness as well. And with Rye looking for connection and goodness, and in light of all of her loss due to the pandemic, I thought was pretty fascinating. And how, the way that she felt that, you go forward, you think you found something, it gets snatched away from you. And I think many of us are feeling that way now. And then, I love the ending as well, where she does, find connection, and you believe she'll move forward, making the lives of the children better and saving herself in the process. Oh, I think Tatiana agrees with me. I'm done.
Thank you. Alicia says, this one reminded me of the parables, the illness like the pox. Then people were trying to get around even though transportation was limited. Olivia says, same. I felt it could easily dovetail into the world of the parable. Yeah. Thank you. Others? Maybe some new voices.
I would like to give space to the comment that you made when we were discussing the morning, the evening, and the night in regards to the blind facilitator. And in this era, we are only seeing this story. We are only seeing the conflict of the POC as it's impacting persons who were able to, and it's not just like it's called. The story is called Speech Sounds because that is what has impacted Rye. Rye is losing her ability to speak, but it's not just the ability to speak that is impacted. There are people who are losing their ability to read. There are people who are losing their ability to think in what we don't even think about how our thought processes happen when we come into contact with something there, but they're losing their ability to, what is the word? Mentally reason? They're losing their ability to do that. And I have a note that says that humans are abrasive, aggressive, and don't have the ability to think through their actions because basically they can't actually think. Like we don't have persons who are deaf who speak through ASL. Also, for those of you, if we have anyone here who's in a different country, we have ASL. Is there a sign language that is not stymied in American language that is used in other countries? Question that came up as I was reading this as well. But we don't know because we don't have a deaf character. We don't have a blind character in this story. So we don't know, because it impacts their ability to process mentally. Would the deaf people who know how to communicate via ASL still be able to communicate? Imagine signing a sentence to someone who's deaf with you, and they're not getting what you're saying. Like that, the aloneness of not being able to communicate. And I think that's something that in some way, shape, or form we have all experienced over the course of the last 3 years, because whether you have a family that lives in the house with you or you live in the house by yourself, at some point during this pandemic, everyone has been impacted in a manner in which for 2 weeks or an extended period of time, if you live by yourself, you've had to be apart from someone who either has COVID or has been exposed, and they have to be apart and they have to communicate, come up with ways. Thank you, Okunyi. Come up with ways. The answer to my question about sign language was yes. To communicate with each other. And yes, now we have cell phones, but at the point when this was written, cellular technology had not reached where we are now, where you can just send a text and talk to somebody. But even if you could send a text, could the person that you're texting read? Like it's boggling how what seems to be, and again, this is a Book of Martha as well, what seems to be one small facet of something, when you look at the expanded picture of it, how big that is. How just like, so it's not just their ability to speak, it's their ability to communicate and receive communication.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I found interesting on a different note with this story is in Xenogenesis, the Oankali were very concerned about cis het males and we're very, very concerned about the prevalence of violence and hierarchy, and that combination of things. And we get that right. Like, you know, when the bus jerks, one cis man bumps into another, and then that ends up turning into a big fight. And I feel like Butler causes us to be confronted by violence and hierarchy and domination and all of that in this particular story right away. And I found that to be really interesting, because I think she's asking us again, how are we going to fix this? Like, how are we going to fix this? Because no matter what world we're in, whether it's one dominated by white colonizers in Kindred, or one dominated by aliens, or one dominated by or impacted by this disease, this pandemic, we will still have to deal with the most prevalent and intimate violence that we have right now, right? Hierarchy, patriarchy, colonization, domination. That is the evil that's present right now, right? That's more immediate than alien invasion. And so I liked that she caused us to look at that. And by taking speech away in this particular story, you know, she reduced the characters to impulses and gestures, and you know, it was interesting to see her try to create interactions between people who had like recently been what we would call able-bodied, right? With each other, just like dealing with like the loss of a sense, right? So I thought that was really interesting. I was sad when you know, we see the lovemaking, we see this sort of tender interaction between Rye and I forget the other guy's name. Obsidian. We see their negotiation. I like the fact that she gave us like this, you know, this backseat lovemaking scene twice. And we don't see a lot of that in her work. So she gives us that, and then she rids the story of it and then moves on. And I thought that was kind of funny. You know, and then he dies, right? And then he's killed, and it's you know, a tragic and quick death. And then we're left with, again, this potential adoptive parent-child, you know, relationship that Sharon, I agree, like there's this hopefulness to the end of that story that we don't often see in her work. Like, you know, it felt kind of optimistic.
I have the chat.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. CA shared, she said she let us know that she has a spiel that she was going to write out. She said, OEB studied humans so studiously. She tied the inability to communicate, to read, and speak with the violence that is always sure to come. And then she says, more an interesting anecdote rather than a discussion point, but this is interesting. She knows someone who has a partial aphasia due to brain damage. She's partly deaf and blind on one side. And so in addition to the partial blindness and reduced peripheral vision, she can't read with that eye. She can see reading, but she can't process it. So, but she can read with the unaffected side. And I think that is that's very interesting. The brain is, wow. Was anyone, because CA also says that Obsidian's death, which every time I read this, and now even more so because I know you and Jerry, I'm like, why did she go Obsidian and not Onyx? Anyway, CA said that Obsidian's death gutted her. Was anyone else impacted in any way by Obsidian's
MJ?
Oh, I'm sorry. The information, thank you, CA, was about the aphasia was from Olivia, not CA. Go for it, MJ.
Sorry. I just want to say it got into me too. That's all. I did this is my second time reading Bloodchild and other stories, but the first time I read it, I actually cried because I thought to myself, like, okay, so Rye gets to go home and she doesn't have to be afraid of that like creepy polygamist next door, and she'll have someone to stay with her, and she doesn't have to be lonely anymore. And then he got shot in the head, and I was like, okay, thank you, Octavia. It was devastating, and I liked him so much as a character. Like, I mean, it's so interesting how she can give these characters so much flavor, and they're not even they're grunting at each other. Like, they're not even talking. There's no actual conversation being had. They're just using grunting noises, and she just described it so well. And yeah, it was devastating when he died.
I think that if she were writing it today, I expect that she would have used different words to describe the articulation of the characters. I think that the way that she noise, like using words like grunting and other words, sort of gets us thinking in a particular direction. So I wonder what words she would have used to describe how they were communicating with each other through like articulation and also gestures. Hello to folks in YouTube land who are joining us to listen to the conversation. I think I'm mindful of time. We try to end at the 2-hour mark, so we have 20 more minutes and we have 4 more things to talk about. So I'm going to move on to crossover, a very brief story. So maybe we'll spend like just a couple minutes on it. Does anybody want to share their views about crossover? Just a glimpse of a woman going to the liquor store after work, going back home, seeing a figure with a scarred face, interacting with a person on the street who is drunk, and heading to the hotel with him afterwards, and a bunch of things in between. I guess one of the questions that I have about crossover for folks was the man with the scarred face real? Did anybody get a sense that
we have the same motherfucking question?
Oh,
I don't know. No, it's like, who else sees him? All of the drug, like, she sees him, and it's like, oh shit, what the fuck are you doing here? There's something about his aura that says bad person in wrong place. The drunks have no reaction. All they're talking to her about is how ugly she is, but she can still get it if she's willing to give it up. Like, I don't fucking know.
Anybody want to talk about crossover? I mean, the title, crossover.
And they leave together. Where are they going? They leave the apartment. Where you?
This one didn't leave a big impression on me. I'll have to reread it now that you point out this about it. Yeah.
Well, the neighbor, she's screaming and screaming and screaming. The neighbor comes by and he stands right behind her.
But the neighbor doesn't see.
But the neighbor doesn't see him. Right? We're talking about Bloodchild, Bookish Noli, by Octavia E. Butler. So the neighbor doesn't see him. And the neighbor's like, are you okay? Are you okay? Because she's yelling and she's screaming, right? And then she leaves, right? So she's communicating with him. And so it's just interesting, that one. Okay, well, it looks like and she throws something, yeah. All right.
I'm gonna have to reread this.
Yeah. Okay, so, Maria says, I assumed he wasn't, I don't know if you want to say that on your own, but I'll read it unless you want to come on camera.
Yeah, I can. I assumed that he wasn't physically there, but I wondered if this person, if she had invented him entirely, or if he was already someone from her past and she was just only imagining that he was there in the moment.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
It felt like a haunting to me. It felt, go ahead, Jennifer.
It's almost like it's like he's there, but not. Like you lose someone and you want them there. You think about them in a sense that you want them there so bad that they're actually there. You're having a conversation with them. You're going through I watch a lot of television. Anyway, so they're there with you. And you're going through all these emotions with them. And then you realize someone knocks on the door and they're not really there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but not for some. Because I went through an experience after my father passed where it was like I was dreaming and I was holding him, crying and all that, smelling all the senses. And then when I woke up and realized he's not there and had to catch my breath. But it's like, it's so real that it's not real. So for her, it was real, but everyone around her, chick, you crazy. So, but in a sense, yeah, she might have been, I don't know, something wrong. So.
It was, I have to say, Jennifer, it was, I'm not sure what that picture is right over your shoulder, but very powerful. He's saying that with the portrait right behind you in your home. So
it's my father. That's who that is.
I thought so.
Okay, yeah.
It's powerful to hear you talk about him taking up literal space while he's taking up literal space. So that was beautiful to see that. And I'm sorry for your loss. Any other thoughts around crossover? Okay.
I was just thinking it was interesting, the idea of him being a ghost, which hadn't occurred to me, because now I'm kind of re-looking at it. And the thing that like put him in jail is he wasn't supposed to be fighting, and someone hit him and pulled a knife. So I'm like, what if that was the moment he was killed? But the revision in her mind is that he went to jail and that's why he's not there.
Yeah. And then we see her, like, she's working at a, crappy job. And, Butler's interesting here because in the afterword, Butler could say so much and she doesn't.
It's like this.
She talks about, and I had really crappy jobs. And so I wrote this book and it got sold. Like, she tells us a lot about employment and, what she did on her breaks and about her writing life, but we don't really hear very much about that. I mean, she says, I didn't wind up hallucinating or turning to alcohol as the character in Crossover does, but I did keep noticing the company oddities everywhere I worked, and they went right on scaring me back to the typewriter whenever I strayed. So, she offers us hallucination in the last sentence of her afterword. So we can sort of reflect on that one a little bit. And just in light of time, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, skip over the essays, the nonfiction work about writing, but happy to to read any comments you might have in the chat about that and her journey. But the last two ones are Amnesty and the Book of Martha. So let's talk about Amnesty. Thoughts about that. So we encounter Noah and the stranger communities, and Noah is in the process of learning that she her request to be subcontracted has been allowed. She basically goes through an interaction. She learns about her job, and she learns that her job is to calm a group of humans who will be working with the stranger communities. She is a translator. We learn in the last couple of pages of the story about what actually happened, which was that aliens and the stranger communities and humans encounter each other. Humans do what they do and launch a bunch of nuclear. I thought that was funny. Launch nuclear weapons, half of which are returned to them, half of which are reserved.
That's so gangster. That was so fucking gangster.
Just to be petty, like I was just like, what did she say? She says, they said, what happened to them? One was like in the Pentagon,
in the Pentagon, in the Oval Office, in the I was like, yo, y'all are like hella petty. Just
and then when she said
shits and giggles.
It was a short, quiet war, Noah said. We lost. Right? And to be reading this, but also, so there's that. But we're also reading this story, right? We're reading this story. We know what's happening in the Ukraine. We know what's happening in all different parts of the world, right? There are wars that have been going on for decades that don't get news coverage. So we have been in war times somewhere on this planet since get, right? And so again, she asks us, what are you going to do? We know that Noah has decided that survival means figuring out a way to coexist. And like Lilith, Noah is a Black woman who is being looked at sideways by the Black man in the group, basically as a traitor, and others as a traitor to humanity, but him as an extra traitor because she's Black woman. But we have her making some decisions about how she's going to manage this relationship and what is she going to try to do, and she's like, I am going to put myself in service because this is what makes sense to me, because we are not going to win. We are not going to win. They took the bombs that were coming in our direction and they gently planted them in the Oval Office and other places on the planet. We lost. We're not going to win. Uprisings will not work. Resistance will not work. Right? So what did you think of Amnesty?
Okay, I was looking for unmute. One of the first things that I did after reading this was to remind myself of the actual definition of amnesty. And amnesty is an official pardon for people who have been convicted of political offenses. And in this case, the people are the communities. And the political offenses are the years, 10 years, 11 years that Noah experienced life in the Mojave bubble, and what she dealt with, what she felt, but also what she knows happens to the other humans who were taken. She knows that there are humans that died by accident, and the response of the communities, which was very melancholy, and also like I feel like this was us. This is another. Okay, my brain. This is another way of like when the Oankali and Lilith's brood communicate, they take whole possession of you. Like, and it's not forcibly done, but they communicate better with you if they can touch you in some way, shape, or form with a tentacle, with all their tentacles. And we have that same tactile touching with the communities, but also communication through sign, which is another point, but their own different kind of sign. And the humans, I think the humans have realized that they've lost, and so they're attempting to resist in whatever little ways they can. So the little ways that they can resist is, I'm not going to learn the sign language, but dummy, you going to work for them. So what the fuck you going to do? You need to know in some way, shape, or form how to communicate with them so that you don't get hurt. But I think that in this case, when we're looking at just the title itself, Noah has granted amnesty to the community. And in order for her job, with the communities to work the way that the communities need them to work, and the way humanity needs, no, the way the communities want them to work, and the way humanity needs them to work, is for the humans that she comes in contact with to grant amnesty to her.
Hmm.
And that's a whole nother fucking situation, because we are hard ass people. When I say we, I mean me, but also I ain't the only one.
Others.
Others.
This story shook me, says C. Nwaugu. The lack of agency was so multidimensional. The invasiveness of communication was chilling. Whew. And Olivia, I immediately thought of Lilith in this story, the messenger being viewed as the traitor, and other comments in the YouTube chat. Okay. Anybody else in the Zoom want to comment on Amnesty?
I thought it was a realistic portrayal of how things would play out if an aliens actually came. Like, it's not going to be Independence Day. Our best bet is to be peaceful and hope that they mean well, because they got lucky that they didn't return fire with fire, because chances are we won't be able to. If someone can travel across the cosmos, they almost certainly can end us if they want to. There's no point in trying.
You know, Josh, like, yeah, you know, given your work and what you do and your knowledge of the cosmos, like, I'm glad to hear your thoughts on this. You know, I think I tend to agree. And the hubris of humanity and the leaders, like what we have seen, right? We've seen with COVID, we've seen with wars, all, you know, the majority of the major global players, all of the major global players are led by, you know, patriarchal interests and white supremacist or near white supremacist interests. And so with that reality right now being the dominant reality of all the leaders on the planet, we know what the response would be if we had an invasion. We know what the response would be, and it would be a militaristic response very quickly. I mean, we had the military come in because of a snowstorm here in Canada. So we know that it's going to be a militaristic response. And I agree. If you can traverse a whole or several galaxies, what makes us think that our little pebbles are going to be actually, you know, persuasive or a show of force in any way, right? Like, and so I think I totally agree with you, Josh. And, you know, and Lilith basically says this, right? She says this in Dawn. She's like, where do you think you are going? Right? And what do you think you're going to do? Right? Haven't they learned anything yet? Right? So I just feel like I totally agree. And in any event, I truly believe that Octavia Butler, when she gave us these stories of aliens and so on, I don't think that her first reason, her primary reason for doing that was to teach us how to manage aliens. I think her primary reason was to like put us in direct contact with our impulses as a human race, and to say, we have time now to fix this, so that if this ever happens, we will not be the architects of our own misfortune. Right? We have time now. Consider this a warning. And so, I guess the question is, have we learned anything yet? Right? Like, have we learned anything yet? Let's see what the chats are saying. I just want to honor that there are some sharings in the chats about elders passing away. So Juanita Nesbitt, just want to honor that you've shared that as well. And so Olivia says, I was not surprised that while the community's harm towards humans could, in very generous terms, be chalked up to ignorance, the human violence toward Noah was outright malicious, right? Yeah, and when she says this, like this is even when the Owen Collie with Lilith and Dawn, so not in Dawn with Adalherites, but also Dawn right at the end, the Owen Collie are like, yeah, the other humans might try to kill you. So we're going to give you extra human strength because they're going to try to kill you. And I think because Octavia E. Butler chooses so often to have Black female protagonists, unlike other science fiction or near contact or first contact stories or colonization stories, you know, we have to actually deal with the sexism and the racism, right? So it's not only, we've got protagonists who are looking sideways and being like, wait a minute, like my ancestors were colonized. Don't start talking to me like this is my first time, right? We have memory of this. So yes, okay, I see comments here. Does anybody else in the Zoom want to voice some comments before we move on to the last one? Okay, I note the time. The Book of Martha, the last short story in the collection. Thoughts? Anyone?
This was by far my favorite story. You made a lot of great points earlier in your discussion about the role of how Black women sees God. Personally, I loved the dissection of this utopia, the ability to create a supposed utopia, and the immediate questioning of her own ability to do that, whether or not that's something that can be achieved, and whether or not it's something she wants to be responsible for, whether or not it's worth the risk to make things worse. And I mean, I thought it was pretty sadistic, to be honest, of her God to do that. But it was such a compelling story, and I really want to see what happens after she does what she does, because I love the idea of what she did, of giving us these dreams that were vivid, and how in the long term that could be helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, same. It wasn't my favorite, but it is probably my second, no, my third. I think. Anyway, I, as someone who does have a background and a current faith base, I have to agree with Josh's statement that this was like, don't ask me. Of all the people that you could ask on how to do one thing to fix humanity, like don't ask me. I am too vengeful, and I will say do this and know exactly what the fuck ups will be in between this actually working, and be fine with it. Like don't ask me. Like that is don't ask me. And then like one of my questions after reading this was what I want to remember. What I want, like I would want to remember the encounter, because the encounter is really nice, and it's eye-opening. It's because you have Martha, number one, seeing what she apparently has seen and been taught for God to look like, and that perception changes as she continues to have this communication with him, to the point where she has made her own apartment in this, in this field, and now God is fine as hell, and that is a very interesting statement. And it's coming in to sit and have coffee or sit and have tea with her. But but he doesn't give her the question of, or God doesn't give her the question of partially remembering. Because I would need or want to remember the experience of the encounter. Not necessarily my decision. I mean, but I would stand 2 toes down there. So I might just say, yeah, let me know. Let me keep remembering. But would you want to remember? Like that was the question after the entirety of that. Would you want to remember an encounter like this? Would you want to remember that you made this decision? Because I think the discussion between the two of them about examining all of her, Martha feeling like she's not good enough to make this to be even considered to make this kind of decision, being confronted with the reality of it. But even when she's confronted with the reality of it and trying to make a decision, she's not evaluating that on her own. She's not left to her own devices to figure out or think about the long-term effects of this. So it's like, would you want, because that entire encounter, if all I had to do was remember my decision to not forget that encounter, I would want to remember. Jennifer, you unmuted.
Yes, because see, you went on a whole other level. Because I'm looking at it from the Mary and Martha point of view. Because, they had two different storylines in the Bible. But Martha went on a, nice little walk through the garden. And they had this nice little conversation. And each time she turned around, he was a different person. And, it's kind of hard. You're going to have this conversation. You're going to be given this ultimate choice. But when given this choice, you can't remember a thing. And everything you work for, you strive for, and everything is going to be lost in a sense. No books, no livelihood, all of that gone. And I'm like, because I read the story twice already. I mean, the book in its entirety, but the story. And I'm like, and then I didn't have any notes. But anyway, so you're like, So if I agree with all these changes, I can't remember anything that I've done, no changes, nothing. And me being a control freak that I am, and then also a Libra who's supposed to be balanced and indecisive, decisive at the same time. I don't know, my infamous words, whiskey, tango, foxtrot to change. Then I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I don't want to remember anything that's been changed because I don't want to be responsible for what I have changed. So whatever has happened, basically. Because then you don't want the world to be full of diseases, but then you have, it's like he's explaining everything that will happen all in its entirety. And you're like, well, hell, I don't know.
But what, because in my mind, Octavia Butler is the writer.
She's the writer, but
Octavia Butler is Martha. So in my mind, what keeps you from despondency? If your passion is no longer needed, and you have no recollection of this conscious decision that you made for the good of humanity, at the detriment of your passion, your livelihood, your pastime. What is to keep you from despondency if you and depression, debilitating depression, if that's your passion and nobody wants it, nobody needs it because you have made the conscious decision after evaluation to do this one thing to fulfill humanity on the inside, to not have them so struck and obsessed with searching for fulfillment on the outside. What if you choose to forget, which is what Martha does, and is
so you trying to tell me not to moan? So you trying to tell me not to moan?
Not to what? I didn't hear what you said. You trying to tell me not to what?
To moan. You trying to tell Martha not to moan?
No, I'm not. No, because that's about Pharaoh. This is about Martha's decision. I'm not telling you not. I'm not saying don't moan, but I'm thinking of us in the human condition that we have. Where if my passion is singing, like I adore singing. If there was an episode of Touched by an Angel years ago, where there's a chick who has cancer on her vocal cord, and in order for her to be healed, she has to make the decision to have a surgery that will sever her vocal cords. They cannot be repaired, to remove the tumor that has malignant properties, and she makes the decision to do that because she wants to live. For the rest of her life, she's not able to sing. Making that decision and having they give her control. She's a teenager, but they allow her to make that decision. making that decision and then forgetting that you took control to make that decision, not being able to remember that, what the fuck do you do when everything that you have put your life into is gone and you don't know why and you can't get it back? That's what I mean about dealing with the depression and the despondency that comes from that if you don't remember. Yes, and Jerry.
I really have to talk about this. Okay, everybody? Okay, I've been so good. So here we go. I'm going to throw a wrench in this whole conversation. This is my what if question. What if this is not the first time that Martha has spoken to God? Here's my
Yes!
So what is the first line in the story? It's difficult, isn't it? Why would God say that if this were the first time they were talking? So when I read this the second time, I was like, wait a minute. Martha has been talking to God for a very long time. This isn't her first time. And she wouldn't even know, because she would have, what if she perpetually chose to forget, right? And so for me, I appreciate where the conversation was going, but when I was reading this, I was like, okay, Martha is still writing. So the next one, you're truly free for the first time. What could be more difficult than that? Martha Best looked around at the endless greatness that was, along with God, all that she could see. She already knows this is God. She's not encountering the entity, right? Octavia gives us God in the first line. Octavia and starts a story in the middle of a conversation with God. She tells us, in fear and confusion, she covered her broad black face with her hands. If only I could wake up, she whispered, right? This wasn't the first time. And so for me, what I find really hopeful about this story, and I know that I might be pulling at strings or whatever, but that's what short stories are for. She doesn't stop writing. She encounters God again at her desk. She doesn't stop writing. Octavia E. Butler didn't stop writing. And this is the dream. This is the realistic, lucid dream encounter with God that she created. She's in a loop, right? And she doesn't stop. She continues to create, and she continues to ask questions, and she continues to reckon with all of these different options, right? And what if the reason why Martha sees God in her own image and encounters that right at the end, right? Because first it's a white father God, then it's a fine black man, and then it's a black woman, and then it's her. What if that's because it is? And that it's always been, right? So for me, this is why it's one of my favorite stories, because I feel like this story is more immersive than it appears. And I'm going to stop here because we're over time and I could literally go on, but that is my thought. Does anybody else want to talk about? Yes, Josh.
Yeah, I need to add on that, because I really love where you went with that, because I like this idea of God's basically bifurcated herself, and almost like she's the Jesus of the situation, except she's there to embody the human, to best understand the human condition, because we've already know that God turned off their omniscience. I think that's what they said in the story. So I love that so much.
Anybody else want to share about the book Martha before we move on? Okay. So typically what we do at this point after the large discussion is we do a sound circle, and then after the sound circle, we do announcements and we leave. I recognize that it is 9 minutes after our second hour, whatever time zone that you're in. I'm going to ask your grace to finish at past instead of right now, so that we have the opportunity to do the sound circle, and then have our closing announcements and so on, and the selfie. So recognizing that those of you who had to go right at the hour, just want to pause right now and say thank you very much for joining the discussion. I know that Sundays are quite busy, and if you have to transition into the rest of your day, feel free if you need to leave now. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the replay. For those of you who are able to stay further, I'm going to ask Tomi to share the screen again. Thank you for this very luxurious conversation. I'm liking the large form content of Bloodchild and going story by story. And feel free to continue sharing in the chats. All right, Tati.
All right, we are now going to prep to do our sound circle. And in preparation for that, we just ask that you choose a 3 to 5 sentence excerpt. Since we are dealing with short stories, and we're also dealing with conservation of time, if you could keep that closer to the 3 or less, that would be greatly appreciated. And we will begin, and all you'll do is listen to other people read. Either Jerry or I will start so that we get it going. Listen to us read. There's no announcement of what you're going to read, what story it's from. Once there's a moment of silence, feel free to jump in. And those of us, as we are waiting our turn, excuse me, just listen in. And also a cue for those of us who are in the Zoom. If you look at someone who has unmuted, that will let you know when someone is prepping to go again. But don't look at Jerry or I, because we may stay unmuted, period.
The sound circle is now open.
It is so easy, she said. Is it always this easy for you? God sighed. Always, he said. She thought about that, his sigh. The fact that he looked away into the trees instead of at her was an eternity of absolute ease, just another name for hell.
As we introduced ourselves, I realized I didn't like her. I couldn't see any reason for that either, but my feelings were my feelings. I didn't like her.
Healthy people say no one can concentrate like a DGD. Healthy people have all the time in the world for stupid generalizations and short attention spans.
Don't talk, the little boy said to her. There was no blurring or confusing of sound. Both children had spoken, and Rai had understood.
When I was older, I decided that getting a rejection slip was like being told your child was ugly. You got mad and didn't believe a word of it. Besides, look at all the really ugly literary children out there in the world being published and doing fine.
If you're offered a contract, you'll have to write in the drugs you'll need. They will either allow you to have the drugs or you won't be hired. If what you need is allowed, you'll be permitted to order it from outside. The communities will check to see that it is what it's supposed to be, but other than that, they won't bother you about it.
In this world where the only likely language in
You went on mute, Sharon. Start over.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. In this world where the only likely language in common was body language, being armed was often enough.
But still I'm asked, what good is science fiction to Black people? What good is any form of literature to Black people? What good is science fiction's thinking about the present, the future, and the past? What good is its tendency to warn or to consider alternative ways of thinking and doing?
Read. Read about the art, the craft, the business of writing. Read the kind of work you'd like to write. Read good literature and bad literature, fiction and fact. Read every day and learn from what you read.
Or were these children simply immune? Certainly they had had time to fall sick and silent. Rye's mind leaped ahead. What if children of 3 or fewer years were safe and able to learn language? What if all they needed were teachers and protectors?
I'm angry that these things, these weeds can invade us, wreck our economies, send the whole world into a depression just by showing up. They do whatever they want to us, and instead of killing them, all I can do is ask them for a job.
She began to believe she really was at home. She had had some sort of strange waking dream about meeting with a god who looked like Michelangelo's Moses and who ordered her to come up with a way to make humanity a less destructive species. The experience felt completely, unnervingly real, but it couldn't have been. It was too ridiculous.
First, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence and practice.
Scars didn't bother me much. Disability didn't bother me.
Positive obsession is about not being able to stop just because you're afraid and full of doubts. Positive obsession is dangerous. It's about not being able to stop at all.
Shyness is shit. It isn't cute or feminine or appealing. It's torment and it's shit.
I took him to bed. He was the only other double DGD I had ever met. And if nobody did anything for him, he wouldn't last much longer. I couldn't just let him slip away. For a while, maybe we could be each other's reasons for staying alive.
On impulse, she stepped to God and hugged her hard, feeling the familiar woman's body beneath the blue jeans and black t-shirt that looked as though it had come from Martha's own closet.
She had lost reading and writing. That was her most serious impairment and her most painful. She had taught history at UCLA. She had done freelance writing. Now she could not even read her own manuscripts. She had a house full of books that she could neither read nor bring herself to use as fuel, and she had a memory that would not bring back to her much of what she had read before.
Ah, there are more, Tigatoy said, plucking out 2 long, thick grubs. You may have to kill another animal again. Everything inside you, if everything lives inside you, Terrence.
I've often said that since my life was filled with reading, writing, and not much else, it was too dull to write about. I still feel that way. I'm glad I wrote this piece, but I didn't enjoy writing it. I have no doubt at all that the best and the most interesting part of me, it's my fiction. And that is the sound circle. Thank you, everyone. Tomi, if you can share the screen again. Our next book, the second last book of the Octavia E. Butler slow read, is Fledgling. This is a story of an apparently young amnesiac girl whose alarmingly unhuman needs and abilities lead her to a startling conclusion. She is, in fact, a genetically modified 53-year-old vampire. Forced to discover what she can about her stolen former life, she must at the same time learn who wanted and still wants to destroy her and those she cares for, and how she can save herself. So please research this book and the trigger and content warnings that are connected to the story as you make your choices about how you will participate with in our live show, which will be held on Sunday, November 27th, 2022. That will be our last live show of 2022 and our second last live show of our 2+ year journey of our slow and luxurious read of Octavia E. Butler's published works. The next 2 dates are November 27th and January 29th, 2023. We have our Eventbrite up now, so please mark your calendars. And if you haven't gotten your tickets, especially for those of you in the replay, you can go to Eventbrite, type in Octavia E. Butler slow read. You'll find the slow read, and you'll have the option to choose one or both of the remaining shows in the slow read. So you can get the tickets. And just a note on the tickets, there are a number of different price points. You don't get anything different, but what the tickets allow is an opportunity for those who would like to make a financial contribution to the Tati and I to recognize the time and the resources used to bring this to you since September of 2020. You can do that. So there will be free tickets as well as tickets at all different price points as contributions. So you'll see that on Eventbrite. And in terms of the readings, so my schedule will not allow for pre-scheduled reading sprints for Fledgling or Unexpected Stories, as I was doing for some of the others. So there won't be any pre-scheduled ones, but if you enjoy reading with others or reading sprints, I did one for another group yesterday. Just make sure that you're subscribed to ONYX Pages, and then you'll get notifications. And so if you want to do reading sprints, you can do that if I choose to in the future. But I know that there are folks connecting with each other outside of ONYX Pages and outside of the Octavia E. Butler slow read. So if you want to create a space for readers in your community to connect and read together, and you'd like us to share that with those who have already purchased tickets, please just get in touch with us through Eventbrite, and we will circulate the details for your group reads before and in between our next 2 shows. Tomi? Tati?
And then if you would like to connect with Njeri or myself, of course, as Njeri just stated, you can register for the shows through Eventbrite. You can also follow the Octavia E. Butler slow read on Instagram and Twitter. And then you can watch the playlist on Njeri's YouTube channel, ONYX Pages, if you want to keep in touch with us between the live shows.
As we have been sharing with you, we are approaching the end of our journey together. We have 2 more live shows before we end our journey. If you would like to share your ideas with us on how you'd like us to end this journey, please do that through Eventbrite. You will have already received an email through Eventbrite at around 3 o'clock Eastern today, so maybe a few minutes ago, inviting you to fill out the survey and get your tickets for Fledgling. One of the questions in the survey asks, how would you like to commemorate the end of this journey? So if you have ideas or desires, please feel free to share that using the survey tool. And Tati and I will consider that as we decide how we want to wrap up this like first ever experience of reading Octavia E. Butler's work.
All right, and if you would like to stay for a few moments, maybe about 10, 15 minutes after the conclusion of the live, just stay put for those of you who are on Zoom. For those of you who are joining us via YouTube, we do thank you and appreciate your participation. Chat was especially participatory today, and we greatly appreciate your input. And we look forward also to the comments that will come in the future for those of you who are checking back to watch the live. But for those of you who are with us on Zoom, if you're not ready to go, just stick with us for a little chill time if you are able to do so. If not, that's totally fine. There's no obligation to stay.
Before you go though, let's take a selfie, which I forgot.
Oh yes, the selfie.
So, thank you for the reminder, Tomi. If you could hold up your books or whatever platform you read Bloodchild on, we're gonna do a selfie. Somebody just joined. Oh, I hope they didn't get the room wrong. Okay, room right. So hold on one second. I'm gonna take a few photos. All right. Okay, hold up your books. All right, 1, 2, and 3. All right, thanks everyone. All right, Tati, was there anything else you wanted to share before we? Okay, all right.
I'm trying to think through. No.
Okay, all right. So bye to everybody who's on YouTube. We're gonna start.
Thanks, Josh. The poll results.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Huh? All right, I'm gonna end the poll that's been on for over 2 hours. And here are the results. So to the first question, what was your favorite story in Bloodchild? It looks like the winner was Bloodchild at 25. Oh no, 25% Bloodchild, a tie between Bloodchild and Speech Sounds. Nobody chose Crossover or Amnesty or Führer Scribendi. 2, do you prefer Octavia E. Butler's long form works or her short form? 83%, 10 out of 12 said long, which is interesting because she herself felt that she was a better novelist than a short story writer. And then tell us about how you feel about this being the third last show. And I know that there were comments earlier on in the chat. So thank you very much for the reminder, Josh. And thank you so much for those who shared your feelings about this being the third last show. It continues to be a pleasure. And I'm now thinking about what life beyond the OEB slow read looks like. And so, yeah, that's quite a thing. All right.